In this past week, I've been reading a book by David Robertson, All the Little Monsters, How I Learned to Live with Anxiety. David Robertson's paternal grandfather was a white Scotsman. His paternal grandmother was a Cree woman, and his father was raised in Cree traditions. Robertson himself grew up in suburbs far removed from First Nations traditions. When he was growing up, he felt rather inferior and ashamed of his olive skin. And only later in adulthood did he come back to his First Nations connections and traditions. So as a child growing up, he had a sense of inferiority and isolation. He felt apart. David Robertson has suffered from lifelong anxiety. He did have a very real physical condition. His heart had an extra node, which was removed by surgery some years ago in his adulthood. This meant that even now he has an irregular heartbeat, two beats close together, which feels as though his heart is skipping a beat. As a youth, he enjoyed playing basketball and was quite good at it, until one day during a game, he had an episode of extremely rapid heartbeat, very strong, which quite stunned him and left him feeling unable to continue. And since then, he has avoided exercise. Even climbing a flight of stairs or a hill makes him anxious and fearful because he feels that any exertion will bring on rapid heartbeat. He has learned to focus on his bodily sensations, and he, without thinking, scans his body for signs. And over the years, he's been rather a hypochondriac, and even little sensations cause him to fret and be anxious and take him to his doctor. His doctor and his wife have been quite understanding. He has had a few panic attacks, which have sent him by ambulance to hospital emergency. This has become so much a part of his life that it has restricted him. And he says that it has robbed his children of special time with their father. It's robbed his wife, and it's robbed him of occasions which should have been joyful, such as the publication of his first book. He has used several images to describe his anxiety. One is that of an avalanche. An avalanche requires 4 elements: a steep slope, snow cover, a weak layer of snow, and a trigger. You might say that his chronic anxiety is the weak layer. The trigger can be anything, sometimes from a situation which would be fearful and anxious, and other times from seemingly ordinary situations. Often it's his funny heartbeat that triggers his fear. And sometimes his anxiety is to the point that he feels he can't even stand or walk, and he retreats to his bed in a darkened bedroom. Over time, Robertson has seen therapists, and he has found a few techniques which sometimes help or at least alleviate his situation. As an introvert, he was rather skeptical about group therapy, but he was rather surprised and gratified to find in group therapy there were people of widely differing social and economic situations, gender identities, whatever, but what they all had in common was their anxiety and their fear. And this group of people could relate to him, and he could relate to them in ways that weren't possible even with his loving wife and loving children and family. He uses the image of a kayaker in a kayak which is filling with water. The kayaker can stop paddling and use a bailing can to bail out the water so that the kayak doesn't sink. But in so doing, the kayaker is only maintaining a position and can't paddle to move. And he says this is his condition sometimes when to people around him he may seem normal. Inside he's fearful and highly anxious and highly distressed. But he, in a sense, is bailing just to keep in his present position. Most of us, I would say everyone, has had times of anxiety or depression, but we're not encumbered with this chronic situation, which is so debilitating. I can remember years ago when I was living alone in London, England, feeling depressed one evening, and I don't even remember if there was a specific trigger or if it was just that life seemed to be rolling along without any change. I lay on my bed and I consciously thought, if I get up and do something, I'll feel better. And I chose to lie there and wallow. That's not the condition of somebody with chronic anxiety. They can't help it. There was another time when, disappointed in a relationship, I felt that my life had no point, and in retrospect, I would say I was suffering clinical depression. For several weeks, I walked around, and because I had commitments, I chose to keep them, but I was going through the motions mechanically. It felt as though there were a pane of glass separating me from everyone around me. Well, what got me out of that was a new job which put me in contact with a variety of people, and I could put my own life in perspective. But chronically anxious people suffer and continue to suffer. Robertson is quite clear. He's learned a few techniques. One, for instance, is to imagine a worst fear scenario, then interrupt the normal thinking that would take him down a negative spiral, to count backwards from 5 to 1, and then try and imagine a best or at least a better scenario. The object of this, which any of us can use, is to reframe automatic thinking. Somebody who is, say, chronically negative or pessimistic it almost becomes hardwired in how to respond to fear or anxiety. And this is a way of interrupting that automatic train of thinking. And for most of us, how we think, how we act is a choice. That's not so with people with chronic anxiety. My mother, I would say, was somebody who was habitually happy. A friend described her as an enjoyer. One of her sisters was somebody who seemed perpetually pessimistic and negative. What's the bad thing? What's the next bad thing that's going to happen to me? Not that she couldn't enjoy moments, but that was more her personality. I want to be clear, of course, dealing with situations of chronic anxiety, it's not a matter of choice. David Robertson has learned a few techniques that he finds helps. And there have been times when his wife has made him get up out of his bed. One time she gave him a shopping list and said, "You will go and get groceries." And with great fear and anxiety, he got into the car and he drove to the store. But he writes that every item he put in the cart gave him a little boost, a little sense of confidence. I've done that. And when he finished, he had more confidence. Now, that's not to say that he still won't be plagued by anxiety and times when he is bedridden or paralyzed. But over time, he has learned that if he can do these things, it will help. We live in a time where there's a lot of talk about anxiety, and at present there does seem a lot that's wrong and difficult in the world. But haven't there always been times of anxiety? For those of us who are older, we can look back in our lives and see moments of crisis we've lived through, and we're here. Today's scriptures offer a model of how to live. If we look at Leviticus, we're bidden to live lives of honesty and integrity, but not just an inner conscience and morality. Those first hearing this were called not to harvest all their crops, but to leave the edges for the poor and the people who would come to gather the wheat. Not to gather all the grapes in the vineyard, but to leave the fallen ones for those in need. Those who first heard this passage were being called not to focus only on self, but to look outwards, to think outwards, to treat others all the same, whether powerful or powerless, rich or poor, in any condition of life. Called to think of others, to be honest, to have integrity in all our dealings. Jesus' commandment to love one another as he has loved us, again, pushes us outwards to connect with those around us. We live in anxious times, but we don't have to succumb to anxiety, to fear, and to pessimism. Always, if we can reach beyond ourselves, we can make the world a better place for others as well as for ourselves. In this, there's hope and encouragement for those of us who try to follow a life of faith. God created each of us to love and to be loved. God loves us, and isn't this a hopeful thing? May you feel God's love around you and in you, supporting and encouraging you to each day of hope and joy.